Hey, 4C divers! Welcome to Facebook Live. It's September 30th. That's right, guys. It's the last day of 4C's Shark Month. Woohoo! We had a fantastic month filled with lots of fun things sharks related. And this is going to be an even better night because we have a fantastic presentation planned for you guys about the elusive sawfish. Bet you guys would love to see one of those diving. If you want to see one diving, give us a thumbs up. Give us a smiley face. Give us a heart emoji. All right. Tell us where you're listening in from. Tell us hello in the comments section. That comment section is there so you can talk to us during the presentation and ask us questions. All right. So like I said, it is Shark Month at 4C, so you do have an opportunity to go to our website, www.force-e.com, and you can go to our landing page, which has a lot of cool information about sharks and taking the shark classes that we have, booking shark dives, and also shopping our shark swag. That's right, our t-shirts, our face masks, stickers, all types of cool things that you can get that have sharks all over them. I don't know how much we have of sawfish paraphernalia, but we do have lots of cool shark shirts and other fun things for you to take a look at. So while you're over at our website, make sure you're registered for tonight's event before 6:45. Because if you register, I'm going to be giving away some fills for either your air or nitrox fills. And so you want to make sure that you're in so that we can pull your name at the end of this presentation. All right, there's everybody saying hello. Thanks, you guys. Make sure you're giving us a thumbs up, a heart emoji, or a smiley face. And give us one of those like, hey, I'm here. I want to see sawfish when I'm scuba diving. I have not seen one yet. I don't know how that's possible. I have been in the state of Florida diving it seems like almost every day sometimes for 12 years, and I've yet to see one of these little buggers. So I cannot wait to hear about this presentation. So Tanya, we've got Tanya on the Facebook Live. She's going to tell you more about who she is, what organization she works for, and the research she does on these really cool critters. So Tanya, take it away.
Awesome. Hey, everybody. Thanks, Nicole, for hosting, and thanks, everybody, for showing up. I see, wow, we have New Hampshire, lots from Florida. This is great, you guys. Thanks so much for spending your Thursday night with me and to learn about the endangered sawfish that we have here in Florida. So just a little bit about me. I've been working on sharks and rays for over 20 years now. From Texas to Florida. But what we're here to talk about tonight, of course, is the sawfish research that I'm doing and the outreach and education that we're doing on this endangered species. So the sawfish, they're a very large, distinctive type of ray. So they have a skeleton made out of cartilage like sharks and other rays. They have this long, distinctive toothed rostrum here, kind of easy to figure out why they're called a sawfish, right? They've got this hedge trimmer looking rostrum at the front of their head. But they are a ray. That means their gill slits are on the underside of their body. So sharks will have their gill slits on the side of their body. Rays have their gill slits on the underside of their body. And so that's what makes a sawfish type of ray. There's 5 species of sawfish found around the world. And here in the United States, we used to have 2 species of sawfish. And unfortunately, I have to say we used to have 2 because now we only have 1. But at one time, 100 years ago, both species were considered very common and abundant in the coastal waters of the United States. So that's what a sawfish is. These are some things that people often mistake for a sawfish or that we get reports of people seeing or catching. All of the animals on the left, these are all bony fish. These all have skeletons made of bone. And they have 1 gill opening on the side. So swordfish, paddlefish, needlefish, gar, they all have an elongated nose or rostrum, but they have 1 gill opening. None of these are sawfish. Kind of easy to see how they could be confused with a saw shark. A saw shark is a shark, has its gill slits on the side of its body instead of the underside like the sawfish. And they're not sawtooth sharks. Sawtooth is actually a mountain range out in Idaho. So we're here to learn about the sawfish. So I mentioned that we used to have two species here in the United States, and here they are side by side. The small tooth sawfish on the left, Priscus pectinata, that's the species that we do still have. The large tooth sawfish, Priscus priscus, on the right. The easiest way to tell the two species apart is actually by the number of teeth on their rostrum. So these aren't actual teeth like in their mouth, these are modified scales. And they grow continuously throughout the life of the animal, kind of like our fingernails. So they may chip a tooth or break a tooth using it to find food, just like we do with our fingernails, but they'll continue to grow back. The small tooth sawfish has 22 to 29 teeth on either side of the saw, and they can vary by as much as 3. So one sawfish may have 23 on one side and 26 on the other. Another sawfish has 24 on one side, 25 on the other. And the number of teeth that they have on their saw, or what we call a rostrum, is set during development. So when it's an embryo, when it's developing inside mom, the number of teeth on the saw, on the rostrum, is the number of teeth that they'll have for their whole life. So when they're born at 2 feet long to when their maximum feet of 16 feet long, they're going to have the same number of teeth on their rostrum. So that's one way that we can identify different individuals that we see together, is by their tooth count. So there's some other differences with fin placement. Here, the dorsal fin on the small tooth sawfish is much further back on the body than it is here on the large tooth sawfish. But again, the easiest way to tell them apart is by the tooth count on the saw. So again, the small tooth sawfish on the left and the large tooth sawfish on the right. In red here on these maps is where these species historically were found. So you can see the small tooth sawfish has much more of a red area. In the United States, we have this one throughout the Gulf of Mexico from Texas to Florida and up to North Carolina. This species was always more common in the eastern Gulf of Mexico, so east of the Mississippi River. Many more reports in Florida than we had in the western Gulf of Mexico. But you can see this species was only in the Gulf and the Atlantic, whereas we look at the large tooth sawfish, we had this one in the Pacific and the Gulf of Mexico, but a much narrower distribution, not as much red on this map. In the United States, the large tooth sawfish was in the Gulf of Mexico from Texas to Florida, but was always more common. We had many more reports of this species west of the Mississippi River in the western Gulf of Mexico. And so I just wanted to show you some of these historic pictures we have of sawfish throughout their range. In Texas, we have pictures from Brownsville all the way up to Sabine River. Here's several from Corpus Christi, the Bob Hall Pier there. Galveston, which is where I went to college at Texas A&M. Here's several large sawfish that were caught off the Galveston jetties over 80 years ago. But we have numerous pictures from Texas, throughout the Gulf, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, up as far as North Carolina, and lots of photographs of sawfish in Florida. And since that's what we're talking about here, I'm going to kind of take you through a walk through Florida, starting up here at the Panhandle with this old postcard, Cedar Key even. You'll notice a lot of these photographs are black and white. That's back when sawfish were common. Here's some from St. Petersburg. This is in Tampa Bay area where I am, an old newspaper article here. And you can see, here's a man standing here. Here's the tail of the sawfish, and the tip of the saw is all the way up here. So that's how large this sawfish is, reported to be 14 feet, 6 inches here in Tampa Bay. And then we go down the coast, down towards Charlotte Harbor. We have pictures from Venice, within Charlotte Harbor, Peace River, Caloosahatchee River. Moving down to Naples, especially Naples Pier. Historically, we had a lot of reports of large sawfish from the Naples Pier. And even today, you can go on YouTube and search sawfish Naples Pier, and you'll see some videos of some very large sawfish being caught at the Naples Pier. On this photograph here, there's 4 sawfish that were caught. Again, here is a man standing here. The sawfish starts here and goes all the way up to here. And I like to point out in this picture that this is a tarpon here. So, this is likely a very good sized tarpon. They were proud of it. They caught it, hung it up to take a photograph. But it looks tiny compared to these huge sawfish that they had. Kind of looks like a finger mullet here, hanging up against these, 4 huge sawfish here, with some spotted eagle rays down here on the ground as well. So go over to the other coast where a lot of you are viewing in tonight from. We have photographs from Daytona. Here's a sawfish that was already missing its saw. Down St. Lucie, Fort Pierce. Indian River Lagoon, we have a lot of historic information of sawfish being very plentiful in the Indian River Lagoon system. Here's a book on aquatic sports in Florida from the late 1800s, when harpooning and spearfishing for sawfish was very common in the Indian River Lagoon, considered quite a sport. More from the Indian River Lagoon system. Now moving down the coast, West Palm, Fort Lauderdale, Miami, and even down into the Keys. Now you go down to the Keys and you can stop in any of the souvenir shops and buy a sand dollar or any number of things as a souvenir from your trip. Back in the day, here's a young boy who was selling sawfish rostrum to tourists down in Key West. And I met someone here in Tampa Bay that used to do the same. They used to go out and catch sawfish, cut off the saw, and sell them to tourists as a souvenir of their trip to Florida. Back in the mid 1950s, the Theater of the Sea down in the Keys had a sawfish for a number of years. It was missing part of its saw, but they called it Rip. That was on display there for several years. And some of you may recall, several decades ago, but the Key West Aquarium used to have a sawfish there that you could actually pay money and dangle a fish on a line. The sawfish was in this open water pen here, and you could actually pay to feed that sawfish. That was pretty cool. So these 2 postcards were big for us scientifically when we found these. This one here, you can see the mother sawfish here, but you can see these 2 fully formed little miniature baby sawfish. So when we found this postcard, this was really the first evidence we had that sawfish gave live birth to fully formed young little miniature sawfish. And here is this picture from Melbourne in 1912, and you can find 11 baby sawfish hanging in this picture. This mom is so big. Here's her tail. Her saw isn't even in the photograph, but hanging off her here, presumably, they either cut these out of her or she dropped these after they dragged her up on land. But 11 baby sawfish came out of this mother. And so that gave us an idea of how many young these sawfish give birth to. So the picture on the left here, this one picture to me really summarizes the past of sawfish here in Florida and in the United States. That in the 1940s in the Florida Keys, sawfish were so common that these guys, these very well-dressed guys in these 3-piece suits, they could go out fishing and in one day we can count on this side of the boat 30 sawfish. But we don't know how many are on the other side of the boat or how many are in the boat or that they already offloaded. But hanging off the side of this boat, here's the largest sawfish, and then there's several baby sawfish here. We can count 30 sawfish. So sawfish were so common back in the 1940s that these guys could go out and catch that many sawfish. But they kept that many sawfish. So they were at once that plentiful that they could find that many, but they also kept that many. And we now know that sawfish give birth to very few young. So we were removing sawfish from the population at a much greater rate than they were able to replenish the population. By just in one day, this one boat going out and keeping 30 of them. On the right, this is our Florida State record sawfish. So this one was caught in Florida Bay, landed at Flamingo. We know from some of these pictures and newspaper articles that we have longer sawfish measured, but of course the records are done by weight. This one was 648 pounds and was officially weighed. So this is our Florida State record sawfish. So the large tooth sawfish, that's the one that was always more common west of the Mississippi River, most common in Texas area. That species was very common in the early 1900s. From all those photographs I showed you, newspaper clippings like this one, we know that that species was very common in the early 1900s. But by the mid 1950s, that species was already being severely depleted, not showing up as much in fishery logbooks or fishery surveys or newspapers or the such. The last confirmed record we have of large tooth sawfish in Florida was in 1943, so almost 80 years ago. And the last confirmed record of this species in all of the United States was in Texas in 1961. So it's now been 60 years since we've documented this species in US waters, unfortunately. So we consider this species to be locally extinct in US waters. The small tooth sawfish, that one's doing a little better, thankfully. So when we dug up all those records, all those pictures and newspaper articles, each one of those is represented on this map by a yellow dot. So we have records going all the way back to the late 1700s. And you can see here that for the small tooth sawfish, going all the way back, we had them from Brownsville, Texas here, all throughout the Gulf of Mexico, over here to Florida, especially around the Keys, and all the way up the mid-Atlantic coast. We had one here that was landed in New York. We don't know where it was caught, but it was landed there in New York, so that's where we put the yellow dot on the map. But of this nearly 3,500 records that we have, over half of those were in this red area here. So basically, Charlotte Harbor through the 10,000 Islands and Everglades National Park and the Florida Keys. Over half of those records historically were occurring in this southwest tip of Florida. So now we fast forward and we're only looking at records from 1964 on. So by now we've lost the large tooth sawfish. That one hadn't been documented since 61. And you can see here for small tooth sawfish, we've completely lost any records of sawfish north of Florida along the Atlantic coast. And they're kind of barely hanging on over here in the central Texas coast. And this red area has shrunk a little bit. It's no longer encompassing Charlotte Harbor, but is now really only the 10,000 Islands and Everglades National Park, part of Florida Bay. Now we fast forward and we're only looking at records from 1990 on, still gone from the Atlantic coast. Now they're gone from Texas, no more records over here west of the Mississippi. And now mainly our records are coming from peninsular Florida and predominantly still from the southwest Florida coast, mostly now in Everglades National Park and the Florida Keys area. So, everybody always asks, how is it possible that we lost one species altogether and we have this other species that's now, critically endangered, that we're now trying to prevent from going extinct? Well, there's really these three main reasons. Of course, fishing mortality. I showed you all those photographs. They were really a great sport fish. People would go out catch them with rod and reel or the spear fishing or gigging. But also bycatch and nets. Once humans started mass fishing with nets, whether that be gill nets or shrimp trawls, sawfish, because of that toothed rostrum, are very easily entangled in any kind of net. And because nets are the fisher's livelihood, they weren't going to cut the net to remove the sawfish from the net. They were either going to kill the sawfish to then untangle it from the net, or just hang it up, wait for it to die, and then untangle it from the net. So a lot of mortality in fisheries, like that photograph I showed you from the Keys of 30 on the side of that one boat. A lot of mortality from fisheries. But also, like so many different fish and things, loss of inshore nursery habitat. especially here in Florida. We've developed a lot of the shoreline. We've ripped out mangroves. We've ripped out that marsh habitat. We've built seawalls and beaches and condominiums and marinas. So we've taken away a lot of that really important nursery habitat that young sawfish need to survive, to grow, to be adults. And part of that is their low reproductive capacity. So I mentioned that they only give birth to very few young. Unlike a bony fish like a trout or a redfish that spawn hundreds, sometimes thousands of eggs, sawfish give live birth to those fully formed little young, only about a dozen and probably about every other year. So again, like I said, we were taking more out of the population than they were able to replenish and put back into the population. And there were a lot of uses for sawfish. One of them is shark fin soup. So the fins of sawfish are very highly prized for shark fin soup because of their white, flaky texture. And here's an example of a tail fin or a caudal fin of a sawfish that was confiscated in trade in Indonesia that was headed to the shark fin soup market. The saws, the rostrums, are used as curios or trophies. People would buy them as a souvenir, but people would also cut, if they caught a sawfish, cut the saw off and keep that as a trophy to then, hang on their wall to memorialize their catch. The rostrum are also sold in pharmacies in Asia. They're ground up to make the base of a lot of medicines. And they're also live animals are sold for were sold for the aquarium trade. And these are the aquariums in the United States where you can see a sawfish. Like Nicole said, she's been diving for a long time here and hasn't seen one. But we can drive up to SeaWorld in Orlando and see a couple. They've had those sawfish there since the 80s. Those came through the Keys. But these are the facilities here in the United States where you can go see a sawfish. There's a bunch of them out at Mandalay Bay, the shark exhibit out there in Las Vegas, several of the Ripley's aquariums. Dallas World Aquarium has a camera where you can log in and you can watch the sawfish. You can watch them feed the sawfish in their exhibit. That's pretty cool. So if you can't see one in the wild, these are the places where you can go to maybe at least see one in an aquarium. So the rostra also have several uses. They're used in ceremonial weapons, and here's an example here where they've affixed a handle to it. They've decorated it. Sometimes they'll paint them or inlay them in gold. Very fancy for these ceremonial weapons. In Central and South America, the teeth from the rostrum are used in cockfighting. So they'll take each one of the teeth off of the saw here, and they'll cut it in half long ways, and they'll make these artificial spurs to put on the feet of the roosters for cockfighting. There have been some NGOs that have tried to develop like 3D print artificial spurs for the cockfighting industry, but that industry really likes and is willing to pay a lot of money for these sawfish teeth to use as spurs. And then historically, their skin, like sharks, their skin was used to make leather. They were a food species in some places. Their meat was also used for bait. And then the oil from their liver was used to light lamps. So in response to that decline, losing one species altogether, and the other population dwindling down to just Southwest Florida, the state of Florida was actually very proactive and was the first to recognize and do anything about the sawfish decline. And in 1992, the state of Florida made both species of sawfish protected and catch and release only. And then in 1995, Florida instituted the gillnet ban. That wasn't done for sawfish, didn't have anything to do with sawfish. That's why I have this little asterisk here. But it definitely removed a major source of mortality for sawfish. So I mentioned sawfish are so easily caught in nets, and most of the sawfish that were caught in nets were killed to remove them from the net. So this Florida inshore gillnet ban in '95, although wasn't done for sawfish, definitely removed a major source of mortality for sawfish, and is part of why we're starting to see an improvement in the species today. In 1999, NOAA Fisheries, who's in charge of the ESA for marine animals, received a petition to list both species of sawfish as endangered on the ESA. And that's when I came on board. I moved from Texas over here to Florida to start working at Mote Marine Lab. And we started doing the status review. That's when we dug up all those records, those photographs, those newspaper articles that we, the yellow dots on that map. And we completed that status review in 2000, concluding that the large tooth sawfish was gone from our waters and that the small tooth sawfish did indeed warrant being listed as endangered. And that happened in 2003. We listed the small tooth sawfish as an endangered species on the ESA in 2003. So then we spent the next several years developing a recovery plan, and that's available online if you want to read it. But it's a document that lays out everything that we need to do to save the sawfish that are remaining in Florida, but recover them. And that is our ultimate goal from the ESA listing is, to protect the ones that we have left, but we want them to recover. We want them to be removed from the Endangered Species Act because we're starting to see them in some of these areas where historically they were found, outside of Southwest Florida. And so that plan lays out exactly what we need to do, which, as you can imagine, the main thing is that sawfish need to survive an encounter with a human. That's their main threat, is mortality from fisheries. In 2013, all 5 species of sawfish found around the world got protection on CITES, and that stands for the Convention of International Trade of Endangered Species. So if you think about things, especially like ivory, sea turtle shells, CITES limits or prohibits the trade of endangered species parts from one country to another. So we were hoping that this was going to help, particularly with the cockfighting industry in Central and South America. But I think, unfortunately, it's largely driven a lot of that underground. And that's why a lot of NGOs are trying to develop an artificial material for that. In 2014, we went ahead and listed the large tooth sawfish as an endangered species. So although it's been several decades since we've had one here in the United States, we went ahead and listed it that way in case one swims up here, in case there's one out there in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, it's now protected. So both species of sawfish are protected by Florida state law and federally through the Endangered Species Act. Back in 2009, we also designated critical habitat for juvenile sawfish. So I'm going to explain that a little more, what that means. Designating critical habitat for sawfish didn't create any closed areas or no access areas or marine protected areas where you're not allowed to fish or recreate. But what it does do is ensure that any projects that are either funded by or permitted by a federal agency have to be reviewed to make sure that the federal government isn't paying or permitting a project that's going to either kill sawfish or adversely modify that critical habitat. And so there's 2 areas in Florida that we've designated as critical habitat for juvenile sawfish, which are those sawfish less than 200 centimeters or about 6 feet long. And this map shows that here. This is Charlotte Harbor, this northern unit here, and this southern hatched area here. This is 10,000 Islands and Everglades National Park and the Everglades National Park part of Florida Bay. So these 2 areas are nurseries for small tooth sawfish. These are areas where we know sawfish are born, where we've repeatedly got reports of young sawfish in these areas. And these areas provide that important habitat for these young 2-foot-long sawfish to survive, to grow up, to be an adult. And here's an example of why that's so important. Here's a bull shark that was caught by a fisherman, and in it had swallowed a baby sawfish. You can see his little rostrum sticking up here. So this nursery area provides refuge from predators and also a lot of food for these young sawfish. So if any of you have ever been to Chokoloskee, here's a photograph of a baby sawfish here. This is along the causeway from Everglades City to Chokoloskee, this very shallow mud flat here. But we had to figure out what the features were of these areas because, like I said, critical habitat doesn't close off an area. We just have to make sure that we're not destroying or adversely modifying the habitat for sawfish. So we had to figure out what the features of the habitat were that may require that special consideration on projects. And so for sawfish, for juvenile sawfish, that's euryhaline environments. Euryhaline is just a fancy word for where freshwater and saltwater mix. So it's an area that's not full strength seawater, and it's not an area that's full freshwater, but it's the areas at river mouths or in bays where the tidal influence from the ocean or the Gulf of Mexico meet with the freshwater runoff from rivers. So it's the area where freshwater and saltwater mix. And that's where we tend to find these juvenile sawfish. And most often they're in waters less than 1 meter, less than 3 feet deep. So that's the depth that we protected. And often they're along this red mangrove shoreline fringe. A lot of times these baby sawfish are in ankle deep water. A lot of times they're resting up in and amongst the prop roots of these red mangroves. So these are the 3 features that if any project is going to happen in those 2 areas of critical habitat have to be reviewed, to make sure that these aren't being affected. So here's a video that I'm going to show you. This was taken in the 10,000 Islands. We're not allowed to use drones in Everglades National Park or in any national park. So this was in the 10,000 Islands, but here is a baby sawfish right here. So you can see all the features of that critical habitat. It's shallow water. This is, ankle deep water along this red mangrove shoreline. And the tide here, you can tell it's not a high tide because the water is not up in the mangrove prop roots. So this sawfish is just swimming along here, following that tide. And as the tide rises, this sawfish will actually go up here and sit, lay among the prop roots. Because down here in this deeper water, this is where the sharks are swimming by, like that bull shark that had one in its mouth. So great video taken by Michael Scholl of Save Our Seas Foundation in the 10,000 Islands of this gorgeous little baby sawfish here swimming along the shore. You can see this is a soft bottom, very muddy bottom we get in these areas. Of course, it's a ray, so it spends a lot of its time sitting on the bottom. So the soft bottom, sand or mud is what they prefer. Look how cute that is. Oh. And you can see here how shallow it is because his little dorsal fins are going back and forth here at the surface of the water. And in a second here, you're going to see a second one come into the frame. There we go. I'm going to pause this just a second. So here's one sawfish resting here, and here's another one that's swimming in. Again, you can see the water is not up here in the mangroves. So these sawfish, again, they're in very shallow water, 6 inches of water or less. And as that tide rises and as this water reaches these mangroves, these little baby sawfish are going to go sit up here, either rest under that mangrove overhang or in amongst those red mangrove prop roots. So very important habitat for these juvenile and baby sawfish here in the 10,000 Islands in Everglades National Park. So there's several of us that are doing research on sawfish, of course. This is me. I'm with Havenworth Coastal Conservation. I focus on sawfish here in the Tampa Bay area. I am really at the very northern extent of their range. We get a handful of reports every year of sawfish up here in Tampa Bay. Earlier this spring, I managed to tag my first 2 sawfish up here in Tampa Bay. That was very exciting. At Charlotte Harbor here, FWC, Charlotte Harbor Lab folks, do research on the sawfish here in Charlotte Harbor. And this is the area where year-round we have reports, year-round we have sawfish in the Charlotte Harbor area. They live there, they work there. This is one of the best studied populations of sawfish really in the world, are these Charlotte Harbor animals. NOAA Fisheries is doing research in the 10,000 Islands in Everglades National Park on the juveniles. That's where you saw that drone footage from. And then Florida State University is doing the research on the adults. So down in Florida Bay, along the Florida Keys, and now starting to go up, the Atlantic coast of Florida as we're getting more reports from divers and fishermen seeing sawfish up this area, we're starting to expand our efforts up this coast. Right now, we have several partners who are doing research on sharks or some other projects that are able to tag sawfish for us when they catch one. Or so thankfully, we do have people on that coast right now doing some great sawfish research as well. So when we catch a sawfish, of course, we're very excited. We found the needle in the haystack, but we take a lot of measurements of sawfish. So we measure the length of the rostrum or saw compared to several overall lengths of the body. And what we have found for small tooth sawfish here in the United States is that rostrum, that saw, is about 20 to 25% of the overall length of the body. Usually it's right around 23%. So if we have an isolated saw, we can then extrapolate and figure out what the entire length of the animal was. We can determine if it's male or female externally. So sharks and rays, the males have 2 organs for mating. They're called claspers. So here's a juvenile sawfish here with the claspers, and here's an adult sawfish with a clasper. This is from Florida Bay. Of course, we put a lot of tags in them and on them to identify them and track them. So we put streamer tags on them, like you probably see on a lot of fish. We've tried satellite tracking these, like you may have seen for turtles or the white sharks. It doesn't work really well on sawfish, though, unfortunately, because some of the tags have to break the surface of the water to transmit to the satellites. But a sawfish spends most of its time resting on the ground. So we've moved to this newer technology for us for sawfish, which are these internal transmitters and acoustic receivers. And you can think about this kind of like SunPass. So in your car, you have the little white box. That's your transponder in your car for paying the tolls when you go through the toll booth. So we put these little transmitters. They're about the size of a AAA battery. We surgically implant those in a sawfish. And then anytime that they swim near one of these acoustic receivers that people have, I mean, all around the country and really all around the world now, people tracking different animals have moored these receivers on the ocean floor, in rivers, in bays. For us here in Tampa Bay, anytime an animal swims within about a quarter mile of one of our receivers, we pick up the date, the time, and the unique identifier code of that transmitter. So just like SunPass, this is the transponder. When you drive through the toll gate, it records the date, the time, and your transponder number. And so that's how these arrays, we have these great collaborative arrays, iTag here in the Gulf, the FACT network over on the Atlantic coast, cooperative scientists who are tracking all kinds of animals share these data, because of course, my sawfish don't just swim around in Tampa Bay, they go down to the Keys, and then I also detect other people's animals on my receivers. So these collaborative networks allow us to share data and resources. So we count the teeth on the saw, and I mentioned small tooth sawfish here in the United States have 22 to 29 on either side. And then, of course, we take a lot of samples from them as well. We have a lot of partners that we send samples off. DNA, our partner, Kevin Feldheim up at the Field Museum, is kind of building a family tree for us of sawfish. So we send a sample up to him. We draw blood that goes to the University of North Florida in Jacksonville. We still don't have a good idea of when and where sawfish mate. So we send blood samples up there, and he's looking at the hormone levels, try to help us, hone in on when sawfish are mating, and then we can overlay that with our tracking data and figure out where that might be happening. So a lot of partners that get samples are helping with our research around the country. This is our sawfish recovery implementation team. This is our group of people who are taking that recovery plan that we published back in 2009 and implementing it. The recovery plan laid out what we need to do to save sawfish and ultimately recover them. And this is the group of people who are working on implementing that plan, saving the sawfish, and eventually hopefully recovering them. So you can visit our website at sawfishrecovery.org. There's a lot of people working on policy, outreach, conservation. again, a whole lot of people, but the Sawfish Conservation Society has an open Facebook group. If you're interested, scientists from around the world post their research results. People post pictures and videos of sawfish they've caught or seen on there. It's a great, like I said, public group. People share a lot of information about sawfish there. You're welcome to go join that and learn more about sawfish. And one of their projects, Sawfish Conservation Society, is this CSAW project. So here are three of our colleagues with some beautiful, big sawfish rostra here. But we can actually get DNA from these old sawfish rostra. So we can do a scraping, get that material out, and they're working on, again, building a family tree, looking at the difference between the historic sawfish population and the current sawfish population. Did we have different pockets of sawfish, or were they, one big population? A lot of things that they're going to be answered from this material. So if you ever see a sawfish rostrum, you go over to your friend's house for dinner and they have one hanging on the wall in their garage, or you see one at a museum, or down in the Keys, there's a lot of them in restaurants and bars. Let us know. We can send you a kit to take a scraping from it, or one of us will go there and take a scraping from it as well. And that'll help us build up that DNA genetic database for us for sawfish here in the United States. So what we've learned now about sawfish, then the 20 years that we've been doing the research now, we know they're born about 2 feet long, fully formed little baby sawfish. But nature has found a way of protecting those babies from each other, and more importantly, protecting mom during birth, giving birth to sawfish with that toothed rostra. So you can see here that the teeth on the saw are covered in this gelatinous substance. We call it a sheath. So these teeth are covered in this that protects all the babies from each other, protects mom during birth. And then once that sawfish is born, this will dissolve off and expose those teeth for it then to use. So nature found a way of how that's going to work. We think they mature about 7 years old. So it takes them 7 years before they start reproducing. And they have to be about 11 or 12 feet long before they start reproducing. Very large animals. So that's one of the reasons why we don't have like stock enhancement, like we do for redfish and trout and flounder and things like that. They have to be so large before they even start reproducing. They grow about 16 feet long. You may recently have seen in the newspaper online 2 very large sawfish washed up dead in the Keys. These were both about maximum size. FWC did necropsies on these, didn't find any noticeable cause of death, so it's very possible that both of these just died of old age. But we are we got a lot of samples from them, and we hopefully will be able to update some of this information, some of this growth information, just because of these 2 sawfish that we were able to recover down in the Keys. We don't know how many sawfish are swimming around out there. That's one of the things that genetics hopefully is going to be able to tell us is what the genetic diversity is of the population, and how many sawfish are contributing to the population. We think they're pregnant about a year. They give birth to 7 to 14 young, probably every other year once they start reproducing. And we know they feed mostly on fish. And here's a great video of a sawfish using its rostrum to swipe that fish. I'll swipe that saw very quick, but also using that sawfish rostrum to pin down fish. So, play this for you. I just love this video, thanks to Barbara Weringer in Australia. I'm gonna play it again just so you can see just how fast they're able to swipe that saw. It's quite spectacular. But then go back here and pin down this fish with this saw. And because they're a ray, their mouth is on the underside, then he just goes back and just slurps that whole
Not yet. Hey guys, I think everyone's letting you know we don't see your video or your PowerPoint anymore, Tanya. So you might need to just close it down, come right back up, and we'll get it. There we go. Maybe. Okay, there's your PowerPoint, but I don't know what happened to you. So let me see if I can. There's your PowerPoint, so you can keep talking. We just don't see you. Tanya, Tanya, guess we've lost audio on you. I know. I'm so sorry. I think people can hear me, but they can't hear you. So yeah, go back a few slides. Okay. Right there. And then go ahead and close down the Be Live and come back in and we should be able to see you. All right, guys, I'm not sure what happened to Tanya. We're just going to go ahead and reboot her real quick, but you guys can all still hear me, correct? Okay, and here she comes. And Tanya, go ahead and do a screen share for your PowerPoint.
Okay.
Okay, Tanya, go ahead and
Can you hear me? Oh,
okay, hold on.
Can you hear me? Oh,
Yes, I can hear you.
yay! Okay.
Hold on. Let me get the PowerPoint back up.
Okay. And now you can see my office. My Hawaiian beach disappeared. Now I lost you, Nicole. Oh, where did that come from? I don't see you or hear you if you're talking to me. Can you hear me? Oh, I think we're back. If you guys can see me and hear me, bear with me. I'm waiting for Nicole to text me if you can see me and hear me. Yay, okay, thumbs up. All right. So I think this is where we got disconnected, but I had mentioned that we did designate critical habitat for juvenile sawfish. So we may down the road want to designate critical habitat for adult sawfish. If we find any mating areas or feeding areas or important migration corridors, we're seeing photographs and videos, some of you lucky divers over there that are seeing these aggregations. We don't know what those aggregations are for, but if it's something that's critical, if it's an area where it happens repeatedly, we may also want to designate those areas as critical habitat for the adult sawfish. So right now we really need to do a lot of outreach and education to minimize the threats to sawfish. So we again can save the sawfish that we have left and recover them. The main source of mortality now is, of course, from humans in both recreational and commercial fisheries. In Biscayne Bay a few years ago, some tourists saw a big sawfish here with a lot of rope on it, and luckily the ranger was able to go out and remove that massive amount of lobster trap line from one of these big sawfish. But here's an example of someone who was illegally using a gill net in Everglades National Park. When the rangers went out there, there was a dead sawfish in that. And a couple of years ago, we had an incident along that causeway from Everglades City to Chokoloskee, where 7 juvenile sawfish were purposefully killed. Many of them had the saw removed. There's still a $25,000 reward being offered for any information that leads to a conviction on that, if you happen to know anything. But we know it still happens, that people are catching and killing sawfish, unfortunately. So a lot of the outreach that we're doing is to minimize those threats to sawfish by humans, either by mishandling by anglers or disturbance of sawfish aggregation by divers. So if we're meeting in person, I'd have a lot of swag to give you, but we print and create a lot of materials, do a lot of outreach to share these safe handling and release guidelines. If you ever do catch a sawfish, leave it in the water, especially the gills, so that that animal can continue to breathe. Don't use any gaffs to secure it. Just really cut the line as close to the hook as you can safely get. I showed you that video of the sawfish swiping its saw around. You don't want to get anywhere close to that. So just cut the line as close to the hook as you safely can do, and let the sawfish be on its way. We have a lot of materials that we're creating for divers. And again, if we were there together, I'd be giving you guys all this cool swag. But we have stickers and mask strap covers. If you want me to send you some of this, I will. I'll give you my contact information later. I'm happy to send you some swag. But if you are lucky enough to see a sawfish while you're diving, really the main rule to remember is that, if you get too close to the animal, that you disturb it, then you're too close to it. So, keep your distance from the sawfish. It's there for a reason. It may be there for mating, maybe there for resting after mating or giving birth, maybe there for feeding. If you do disturb a sawfish, don't repeatedly chase it and run it off from where it is. Don't try to feed them or touch them or lay down next to them or anything. But enjoy it. As Nicole said, she hasn't seen one yet. If you're lucky enough to see one, enjoy it. So we're hanging up these signs at boat ramps, marinas, fishing piers, tackles, shops, dive centers. that have the angler guidance and the diver guidelines on here of how to safely and legally interact with a sawfish if you're lucky enough to see one. So you may see those as you're around. We have rack cards that we can send if you know somewhere that would be a good place to have these display racks for brochures and rack cards. We have these that also have some background on sawfish, but also the handling and release guidelines for anglers and the safe viewing guidelines for divers. And then, of course, we ask if you ever do catch one or see one that you let us know. So this helps us monitor the population and see where, if we're getting sawfish back into some of these areas historically where they were found, but we haven't seen them lately. It also helps us target our field research. So if we get a number of reports from a certain area, we'll go there, try to catch those animals and tag it. I showed you on that map, we've got people all around the state. So if you call in and say, hey, I just saw a sawfish at this particular space, one of us is probably going to respond and try to get out there and catch and tag that. They're endangered, they're rare even for us. So, any information that we can get to help us target those field surveys really helps us with the limited amount of money we had. Photos, if you ever get a great photo, we would love to have some more photos for our presentations and our outreach materials on our website and things. If you get a great shot, we would love to include it in some of our outreach materials. I write a monthly article called Sawfish News. It appears in a lot of fishing and local magazines and newsletters and things like that. I share it on my social media channels as well. But if you know of anything that might like to carry this monthly newsletter, just let me know and I'll include them on my distribution. Coming up in a few weeks is International Sawfish Day on October 17th. Usually we do a lot of in-person events at museums and schools and aquariums and such, but this year, because of COVID, it's mostly going to be online. But there's a lot of materials that the Sawfish Conservation Society is putting out and you can download from their website. It'll be a big day on social media. You can follow the hashtag International Sawfish Day and learn more about sawfish and all the research that's going on around the world and the great things that some of the aquariums that have sawfish are doing as well. So the future outlook, large tooth sawfish, that's the one that we haven't had since the 60s. That one we consider locally extinct, haven't had it around in a long time. The small tooth sawfish though, we do still have that one. And we actually, if we follow that recovery plan and sawfish can survive that interaction with a human, we actually do expect that population to recover. We expect to see that population expand back into like Indian River Lagoon and Tampa Bay over here, and hopefully outside of Florida again, and eventually get that population recovered and back off the endangered species list. And we are starting to see some encouraging signs of that already. Some sawfish reoccupying some of these areas where historically they were found. And I mentioned that net ban that wasn't done for sawfish, but that net ban and Everglades National Park are really two key pieces of what helps save sawfish and really what we need to help recover them as well. Both of those have to stay in place. The Everglades National Park Restoration Project is going to be great. Restoring the natural water flow to Everglades National Park is going to be great for sawfish. We've done a lot of research in just the last 20 years and seen a lot of progress. A lot more people are becoming aware that we have sawfish. You may not be lucky enough to have seen one yet, but more people are becoming aware that we have sawfish and now know what to do if they ever catch one or see one. So I'm going to leave you with some fun slides here of just how common sawfish rostrum are in pop culture. So here's a lot of TV shows and movies and games where you're going to see sawfish rostra. If you ever are watching something and see a sawfish rostra, take a screenshot and email it to me because I love seeing these. But here's Pirates of the Caribbean. They were using sawfish rostra as weapons. Several show up, in the background. Even, Batman had a sawfish rostrum in his apartment. The Party House in Point Break, they had a sawfish rostrum hanging on the wall. My husband watches Silicon Valley and recently saw one in the background here. Pretty cool. And my favorite movie, what I think is the best movie ever filmed, Jaws. Quint actually has two sawfish rostra, one of each species, in his fishing shack up there. Here's a large tooth sawfish rostrum here, and then here's a small tooth rostrum hanging back here. So all the work that I do is done off of grants and funded by donations. And so I always have to thank the people who pay me to do the work that I do. And right now I really have to thank the Save Our Seas Foundation that have been funding the research that I've been doing up here in Tampa Bay. Ocean Foundation is my fiscal sponsor from Washington, D.C., and NOAA Fisheries is funding a lot of the outreach work that I do. Usually would pay for me to be on the road giving this talk live in person and distributing some of this swag. If you want to help and help fund the research or the outreach and some of the materials that we're creating, you can make a tax-deductible donation at havenworth.wedid.it. And I'm going to leave you here now with my contact information. I have a monthly newsletter that I send out that you can join on my website. Here I am on all the social media channels. The second one's listed here. This is that U.S. Sawfish Recovery Team. That'll be a lot of management and policy things if you want to follow that. And then the Sawfish Conservation Society. This is that open public Facebook group that I told you about. And they're also on Twitter and Instagram as well. And here is my phone number and my email. If you want me to send you some swag, just drop me an email and I'll get you some goodies out in the mail. Or if you have any questions about Sawfish as well. So with that, hopefully technology is working and I can turn it back over to Nicole and take some questions. I have ran a little over, but have some time for questions.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Tanya. We do have a few questions.
Hey.
So let me just fire them off here real quick. So you talked about doing blood work, and you had on the map, there was like the different sections that people are doing studies. Have you seen that there is a correlation of the blood work you're seeing the same populations within that side of the coast? Are you seeing also anything where there's animals down maybe in the Caribbean and they're migrating up, and so they've been able to kind of see if there's a pattern of migration?
We have not found that yet. One of the things we have discovered is like the animals from Florida and the Bahamas are not mixing. So they are two different populations of animals. No genetic mixing at all between the U.S. and the Bahamas, which of course is our closest neighbor. The blood work is still underway, still trying to find those peaks in those reproductive hormones for us. Don't have any information on that yet. And our genetics people are still working on trying to pin down, for example, is the Charlotte Harbor animals separate from Everglades National Park animals, which are separate from Indian River Lagoon animals, or are they all one breeding population? We don't have that information yet, but it's something that our brilliant lab people who are working both on the blood and the genetics are trying to answer for us. So hopefully we'll have that information soon.
Awesome. Well, we look forward to that answer. And then the other thing is do you see that there is a influx of males versus females or vice versa in the areas that you guys are doing research?
That's a good question. We get about 50-50 of males and females of the animals that we caught. So they're pretty evenly spread. Now there are times where from some of the photographs that we get from divers that they may be all females in that particular photograph, which would then lend us to believe that they're probably resting there after giving birth, because they're not mixed. That's a great question. But thankfully in our research catches, they're pretty evenly split. But we do tend to see them, at least in the little photographs that we get, that sometimes they're only one sex.
Okay. The other thing is when you're talking about, how many are there? So I just asked you a question of males versus females, but how many are there? And because that you had question mark, the population stuff. How does that affect when you have to go over to FWC and give them the report with getting them to continue to protect these animals?
Right. That and when and where they mate are really our two biggest questions that, from a management standpoint is really going to help. We know looking at the map that their range has contracted dramatically. So they, small tooth sawfish used to be found from Texas to North Carolina. Now they're only in South Florida. So when you look at it from a geographic standpoint, clearly they're endangered, that, we're only having them just in this little pocket of South Florida. But yes, genetically, and that's one of the things that our geneticists, we send a little piece of the fin. We cut a little piece of the fin off. It's about the size of our pinky fingernail. We send that to Chicago to the Field Museum, and he's the one building that family tree for us. So, if any of you have ever swabbed your cheek and sent it in to like Ancestry or 23andMe, and it starts telling you have this cousin you didn't know existed, that it's the same technology that he's using for us on Sawfish. And so eventually they're going to get to the point where they're going to be able to say there are this many females who are contributing DNA to the population, and then we're going to be able to extrapolate out. But I mean, right now, if we had to make a wild guess, we would say there are a few thousand sawfish in the wild, but that's really a wild guess. But we know from the range contraction, how dramatic the population has declined.
Okay, so then, if we're talking about the population, do we even know the percentage of the newborns? Will any of them make it?
We don't. We know natural mortality is pretty high for most sharks and rays, or even sea turtles. Very few sea turtle hatchlings actually make it to adulthood. That's just the nature of wild. But we don't have an exact number, no. But probably of a litter of 12, maybe 1 or 2 are going to survive to adulthood to be able to start reproducing, just from the natural mortality of being eaten by things. And
And I did get a question. Would there be any plans to try and reintroduce the large sawfish to the area?
That is a great question. There are still large tooth sawfish down in Central and South America. There have been some research projects going on, like in Mexico, in some of the other countries, trying to find sawfish, and they have not been able to find any sawfish either. Usually when a sawfish is caught down there, we know about it because it winds up in a market for sale. So it's been caught, it's been killed, and then it wound up in a market, usually for cockfighting industry, or the meat is for sale in a market. So we would love to, but trying to find one would be hard. It would be a logistical nightmare just trying to find one. And there aren't really enough down there either for us to be comfortable taking any out of the population to bring here. And same thing with like reintroducing them to Texas. Would we want to take any out of Florida and relocate them to Texas to try to reestablish a population there? And part of our genetics will help us answer that. Was the Western Gulf a separate population from the Eastern Gulf? But even that, I'm from Texas. I would love for there to be sawfish back in Texas. But there aren't enough in the population here in Florida even for us to feel comfortable taking any out of the population in Florida to try to reestablish something over in Texas right now. So we would love to, reintroduce small tooth over there or bring up large tooth from the south, but right now it's just really not feasible.
Yeah. And also I'm just thinking about in like the sense of transporting these animals and how well they do being caught and put in aquariums until they're transported to be put back in the ocean. You did talk about having aquariums that held these animals. Do they do well in aquariums? Or?
They do very well. Yes, they do. They're very hardy. I mentioned the 2 that are in SeaWorld in Orlando. They've had those 2 sawfish since the 80s. So they do really well. They spend most of their time laying on the bottom. They're pretty low maintenance and they're pretty hardy. And so they're amazing to see in an aquarium as well. But yeah, one of the interesting things about sawfish in aquariums, because they get hand fed in the aquarium. I showed you that video of the sawfish feeding and using its rostrum to hit at fish, and that's how they would normally break those teeth like we do our fingernails. But sometimes in aquariums, because they're hand fed and they don't have to hunt their food, their rostral teeth get really long. They'll get like 4 inches. They get really long and spindly because they're not naturally broken down because they don't have to hunt for their own food. So that's an interesting thing that we've seen in some of the sawfish that are in aquarium facilities. That unique thing about them being in, but yeah, they do really well in aquariums, really well.
Gotcha. Well, guys, that is the end of our questions, and we are going to pull up the live raffle. So there is the random name picker. I've put everybody's name that registered before 6:45. There you guys are, and we're going to pick somebody to win some fills at 4C. So the first winner is Martin Cherry. Martin, if you're listening, give us a thumbs up, and you are going to get some fills. And let's do another random name picker. Here we go. Da, 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 da. And Michael. I know Michael is listening. So, Michael, you are next winner for some fills. All right. So, guys, thank you all for listening in. We appreciate you coming to our Facebook Lives and learning about the animals that we love diving with, or we want to dive with, right? So hopefully you guys will get a chance to dive with a sawfish soon. And if you have any photos, make sure that you're giving those to our guest presenter. She gave you her contact information. And make sure you're doing the report to FWC so that they can record these sightings. All right. So that phone number, it was on the presentation. And if you could, what do you remember? What off the top of your head? I know it was something sawfish.
It's 8444 sawfish.
There we go. 8444 sawfish. All right. So, guys, thank you so much for joining us, and have a great rest of the evening. See ya.